All right. Good afternoon, good morning, everyone, wherever you are in the state. I hope everyone is enjoying some of this warmer weather. I know I am. It helps boost my mood. Um, we're happy to have everyone joining us today for our February Lunch and Learn. Just a couple of housekeeping items before we get started. Please remember to keep your mics muted during the presentation. Also, I will put a link to the TEIS Community Resource website in the chat momentarily. That is where the presentation will be uploaded here in a couple of days, as well as the PowerPoint, and you can find all of the past Lunch and Learns and PowerPoint presentations available there. Also wanted to mention, if there are any families in the presentation today, welcome. We are so excited to have you. Also, if you are a service coordinator or an early interventionist and you have a family on your caseload that may not be joining today, that you think could benefit from this information, please let them know that this will be available to them on the TEIS Community Resource website. We want families to be able to access this information as well. At the end of the presentation, I will put the form stack link to complete the survey and get your confirmation of attendance through email. So be looking for that at the end of the presentation. Closer to the end of the presentation, I'll also let you guys know the date and time for the March Lunch and Learn. Um, those are all of the housekeeping items, so we'll go ahead and get started today. We are really excited to have Emily Wagner and Maggie Wheeler with us today to present some information on augmentative and alternative communication. So I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to them.
Thanks, Emily. We appreciate that. Can everyone hear us okay? Sounds good.
Yeah, sounds great.
Okay, good. So we just want to introduce ourselves to start off with. So like Emily said, my name is Maggie Wheeler. I am a speech language pathologist. So I previously worked at the UT Pediatric Language Clinic here in Knoxville as the developmental therapist in our center-based program. And then in 2022, moved over back to the vendor side of things within UT and our clinic. So I'm one of the SLPs in our clinic here. And my specialty areas are autism, early intervention, and AAC. I also do a tiny bit of feeding in there as well. So I really have a fun perspective, and I'm glad that Emily kind of pulled me back into this TIS world of things here to talk about AAC today with her. And I'll let her introduce herself.
Hi, everyone. My name is Emily Wagner, the other Emily on the call. I am also a speech language pathologist by education. And I kind of had the opposite path that Maggie did. So I started on the vendor side of things. I've worked in East Tennessee as a vendor. I've worked in Middle Tennessee as an SLP vendor. And now I'm working as a developmental therapist at UT's Pediatric Language Clinic. I'm also a clinical instructor there, so working with some graduate students in the speech pathology program. And my clinical interests are also related to autism, AAC, and early intervention. I dabble a little bit in feeding also, but it tends to look more like adult swallowing, which is not related to this call. So thank you all for joining us today to talk about AAC and how that relates to our family's journey. We have created a poll everywhere just to kind of get to know you all and kind of understand where you're coming from related to your AAC knowledge and your background. So Maggie is going to share with you a poll everywhere link. So hopefully you're seeing that now. You can either scan this QR code with your device or type in that pollev.com link with Maggie's name. And if it prompts you to register, please just skip that and you should get to the question. So we're just looking to see who are we talking to today and what you guys know about AAC. I'll give you all a second to do that. Okay, getting some responses. All right.
It's working. Yay! We did
it. Technology.
So proud of us today. All right.
Honestly, sometimes that's a barrier with AAC.
Yes, exactly. See, it's just real life application already.
I can't find it.
But they couldn't get in, but they also said I don't know, who knows? The ones that are in there are not the ones that are going to figure it out.
Sorry to interrupt everybody. Please remember to keep your mics muted. I'm going to go through and make sure there's no one else that may be unmuted, but please remember to keep your mics muted during the presentation.
All right, so we're like 50-50, lots of developmental therapists, lots of service coordinators, a few others, couple vendors. Okay, great.
And there's one more question. So what's your experience with AAC? What do you know about it?
All right, it's active now, so please respond to this one.
Again, yay technology. Drop in the chat.
All right.
Very good.
No experience. All right. I love it. I'm so glad that you're here today. Yay. Way to try something new. That's amazing. All right. Thank you. That really helps us just kind of with our thought process and everything for today. Let me get back to our PowerPoint for you guys.
So just to give you all kind of an overview of what we'll talk about today. So we'll give you a little bit of an introduction related to what is AAC, what does that look like, especially for our kiddos. And then Maggie will talk a little bit about what does that look like from the vendor standpoint, how can we team and work together? And then I'll kind of close out the presentation with a survey that we asked our families to take related to, hey, I'm in this journey right now. Here's what I need more support with. Here's more of what I would like to know. And then just some wrap up thoughts about how can we provide that for our families. Okay. So an introduction to AAC, what is it? It stands for Augmentative and Alternative Communication. So essentially we're looking at any communication that's not verbal speech. This type of communication could be a low tech, could be mid tech, or high tech, and that could range anywhere from gestural use all the way up to perhaps an eye gaze system that a child is using connected to some sort of computer type device. And I can't remember, honestly, if Emily mentioned this when we first started, but if you all have a question as we go along, please feel free to drop it in the chat and Emily can kind of help us and we can pause and answer any questions you might have. Okay, so this slide is just some examples of what a low tech or maybe even no technology AAC looks like. But the very basic, you could use an object to represent something. So think about a child who maybe will bring you a cup to indicate, hey, I'm thirsty, I want a drink of water. Or maybe a child might bring you their shoes to say, hey, I want to go outside, I want to leave the house. Objects can be obviously they're tangible, right? So that stays within the child's field. And it's also something that you have access to all of the time. Versus some of these other things we might talk about, you might think, oh, I'd like to have a picture of that, but I don't have one quite yet. So objects are always an option. Another one here could be picture cards. So in the top right-hand corner of your screen, you'll see sort of like a PEX type of board. So there's some single pictures with some visual representations. So using picture cards to hand could be a way to communicate using AAC. Another option that could be low or no tech would be a communication or an alphabet board. So the image on the bottom here is kind of an example of an alphabet board. Some of those alphabet boards might be geared more towards adults, but we know that some of our kiddos are also hyperlexic, so we shouldn't discount them and their ability to spell and use letters to communicate a message. But these are typically a single sheet of paper, a single board. A child may have multiple boards for multiple topics. So let's say maybe the child really loves to go to the zoo. We have a board of zoo animals and some related verbs and actions, descriptors that might go along with the zoo, versus we have a separate one for mealtime, as an example. And then sort of the last example that I have here of low or no tech are gestures, right? So we have some gestures that are pretty universal. If a child is standing and they reach their arms up and do one of these numbers, we all know that they want to be picked up, right? Pointing is technically a form of AAC. It's communication that's not verbal speech. The list could go on there. We all know that our children use some gestures that are maybe typical to them, but not everyone knows. So getting to know your families well there and like, hey, this gesture has happened several times. Dad, do you have any thoughts about what that means specifically for your child? Okay. And so this slide is talking about some mid-tech options. So think not a computer, but it's not quite just a single image or a low-tech option. So some of the ones I've listed here are the Go Talk. In the top right-hand corner of your image there, that green one is a Go Talk. So if you've never used one of those, the visual inlay can be changed, right? Those slide in and out. But if you do press the cell, there is an auditory message that comes related to it. With this device, you're programming all of the auditory messages. So you would press the button, speak the message, and then it's programmed in there for the child to use. Another option could be a single switch button. So in the bottom left image there, that's actually called a step-by-step, which means there are a few levels that you can program. So like if it has 3 levels, think maybe the verses to row your boat or something like that. But essentially the child's role is there, is that they would press the button to activate it and it would speak some sort of message. Frequently, I will use this as an early introduction into AAC to help teach children that cause and effect. I love to pair it with a visual and just Velcro it right to the top there. We do a lot of go with that. And so just some other options there. So for mid-tech, think some sort of technology. Maybe we need a battery of some sort, but it's not a high-powered, robust sort of device.
I even found a family this past fall who I was slowly introducing some AAC with in the session, and the mom took the initiative to go on Amazon and she found some little single buttons. And so Halloween was coming up and she had recorded trick or treat, and they were out in the neighborhood and she was having her daughter trick or treat, trick or treat. And she said it was like the most interactive Halloween that she had had. So parents have found these too, just little one step, recordable little buttons. So although these are like some of the fancier kind of SLP versions, there's so many things out there that can be really mid-tech. And so, like Emily said, like such a great starter for a basic routine, something like that now she was able to engage in where she hadn't before. So just a little like common time that I've used them too.
And so this slide is really talking about those higher tech devices. So the first thing we have listed there is a dedicated speech generating device. And so by dedicated, we mean it is not a device that could go to the internet. It's not a device that you would watch YouTube on. It's not a device that you play games on. This device is your voice. And we'll talk a little bit about this later, but if you're looking for an insurance funded device, this is about the only thing that they will do because it is dedicated for one single purpose. So in that very top image there is a dedicated device. Another way that we could access some high-tech AAC is an iPad or a tablet of some sort with a designated communication app. I know a lot of families have kind of gone this route on their own where they're like, oh, we have an iPad at home. I can purchase this $50 or $100 app, download it and see what happens. There are also some free apps out there that maybe aren't quite so robust, but it's sort of an introduction for families. Also, an option here could be an eye tracker system. So the image that's furthest to the right on your screen, you can see the little black bar at the bottom there is actually a way that the device interacts with your eyes. And so there's a calibration system that has to go through. But essentially, instead of touching the device with a hand or a different body part, we're using our eyes as both the mouse and the click, if you want to think of it that way.
We
And then application program interfaces, just another way to access the device that isn't through a finger touch, essentially. So the picture that I've included here is called a neuronode, and it actually uses EEG type of technology to measure a motor pattern that's coming from the brain to say, oh, I tried to move my finger, but perhaps my finger itself can't do all of the motion. I worked with a family one time who used this device, and the young man was able to use the device to click. So he would use his eyes to scan, and then when he was ready to click, so to speak, there was an eyebrow raise that happened, and we had like a little patch above his eyebrow, and he was very successful with that too. So all of that to say, just because your finger doesn't work perhaps the way we want it to, we can have other methods to access the device that should not discount AAC as a method of communication for your child.
we do have a question in the chat.
Yeah.
Someone asked if insurance would fund the Go Talk.
Oh, that's a good question. I don't think so. A lot of the ways that I get insurance involved at this point is for high tech devices. I think typically the Go Talk would be like just a purchase out of pocket. Most companies now have their own like online platform, and so you're going straight to them to get that high tech devices. So as far as I know, most of the requesting I do for insurance is throughout for a high tech situation. So that might be like a Katie Beckett purchase, maybe, as a way to get some financial support that you could, get your SLP to help jump on board and get going.
And something to think about too in that situation, the Go Talk has a limited number of messages that you can program. And I believe insurance will only do an evaluation or fund a device once every 5-ish years was last that I knew. So, if you're thinking about funding a device for a family, they would then have to wait 5 years before we tried for a more robust device. So, being strategic about what you ask insurance for is sort of part of the game, essentially.
Yeah, it was a great question, though.
Yeah. So some common AAC myths. So all of these come from Toby Dynavox's website. It's cited on our resources page at the end of the presentation here. But one of the ones we hear a lot is that AAC use will inhibit verbal speech. So they're never going to talk if they use this device. And the research tells us that this isn't true. Subjectively, I have seen a lot of children go from very little verbalizations, if none, to speaking without the device even, and the device is just there as a safety net. So when I'm dysregulated, when I'm in a new environment, maybe those are times that we use the device now, but the research tells us no, the device itself will not inhibit verbal speech production. Another myth that we hear is that, the child's too young to use a device. And the research tells us that that's also not true. I don't know, Maggie, about you, but I've introduced AAC to children as young as 18 months before. So as long as they have the intent to communicate and a will to try and a communication partner, essentially, then we're not too young to try some things. Another myth is that the child has some verbal speech already, so clearly we don't need a device. Well, just because you have verbal speech doesn't mean that you can always access it with fidelity and in a functional way. So the research tells us that that's not accurate. Sometimes we hear, we need to try a paper-based version first. Also, again, not always accurate. Not to say that you can't try paper-based versions first, but as we talked about with the step-by-step and the single switch options, you can introduce AAC at any level that the child will engage with. And then the last one that we've listed here is that perhaps the child's cognition is too low or their motor function is not in a place where they can interact with the device. And so, like we talked about with some of those higher tech options, there are ways that a child can interact. It may not be a traditional way to interact with the device, but we can find a way. And the biggest thing that I talk with families about in this area is it's a skill set that we have to teach sometimes. And so starting with cause and effect can be a great way to start teaching these skills. But the saying around here is that the only prereq that you need for AAC use is, are you breathing and do you have a communication partner? That's it. We can teach the rest.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I'll say, I mean, I had just an eval on Monday, and we're going to pursue AAC eventually. But at first I just was doing a language eval, and I pulled in a device just to kind of trial and see what she would do with it. 6-year-old diagnosed with autism, the family and other people, like, people were saying there's nothing we can do for her. We're dropping her from services, all of this background. That was just really sad. And the family was like, does she also have an intellectual delay on top of the autism, which 100% can co-occur? And, potentially, I was like, I don't know, I got this girl in here. She was requesting using the iPad, the app I had on the iPad. She started labeling things, all these things that she had never done verbally. And I just gave her access to communication, and someone hadn't yet. And it was amazing. And I mean, the family, like, it doesn't always happen like that, but it was one of those where she could have checked so many of these boxes over the time that she's been in therapy, but no one had ever tried. And so we tried, and it just opened up these doors. And I think the family just felt so positive leaving, thinking, oh, now we have somewhere to go. Now we have something to work towards, where people were just never curious enough to try, or had checked off all these boxes and kind of written her off. So the myths really, it just really matters. It never hurts to try. These things are endurable cases. I've had plenty of them thrown and dropped and whatever. And I'm like, okay, not quite ready for that yet. That's fine. But it doesn't hurt to pull it out and just see. You're just modeling, and just see how a kiddo reacts. So I hope that y'all really think about these myths when you're out there working with your population.
Yes, and please take a look at the link that we have posted later on that shows where these myth handouts are. Toby Dynavox as a company has done a really good job of saying, like, here's some easy to read language, but also here's the link to the research article that backs up this statement too.
Mm-hmm.
We do have one more question. This is an insurance question, I think, in reference to the previous question that was asked. I think what they're asking is the insurance that you were referencing previously, is it TennCare?
Oh gosh, those are great questions. I'm trying to think of some of the AAC evals I've done more recently. I've had some families who are doing Katie Beckett, so definitely have like private insurance. Lately, what I'm seeing with some of the community-based insurance, so like UHC, a lot of the times what they're doing is they're requiring like a trial period. So they're not just outright denying some of the high tech, but they're saying, okay, well, you need a 3-month trial before we'll pay for it. I'm seeing that a lot more with the WellPoint and the UHC users. Those are some of them I've had a little bit more recently. They're all just so different. A year ago, I wasn't getting some of that pushback, and now UHC pretty consistently is saying you need to do a trial period first. And then we're having to just go through an appeal process and doing that whole thing. But I haven't had anyone that I've evaluated in, let's say, the past year for an AAC device not end up with a device. It just depends on how quickly it's going to happen. Some I've done the initial evaluation, it's gone through insurance. And I had, like, I'm trying to think, an Aetna one went through, did the whole thing, and the kiddo got a device about a month later. And then others where I'm doing the trial periods. So it just depends. But that's the most pushback I'm kind of seeing right now. I don't know if that fully answered the question, but that's what I'm seeing, like, TennCare wise. Okay, so what can we as the SLP vendors do to help in this whole process? So the biggest thing, kind of to start the conversation, just like I'm saying, is this whole idea of trials versus evaluations. Like, what does this look like? So for me, an evaluation means that we're going in, I'm evaluating to get this child a designated device. Like Emily was saying, we're not looking at an iPad with just an app. We want a specific company's device. We want their program in a more durable case, and with tech support and all of that comes behind it, which we're going to talk about in a little bit too. But that's what the evaluation is to get them that designated device. For the trials, I'll often initiate those in my session, although I do have families who come through, and because I work so closely with the developmental therapist at PLC, they might loop me in and say, hey, we've been trialing such and such. And I'm like, oh, that's great to hear. Like, let's trial it. I would say typically more often your SLP is going to be the one to start to trial first. I hope that they are. But also here at UT, because we're kind of deemed as like specialists in certain areas and things, we also get people from outside of our clinic who are coming in just for an evaluation for AAC. Any SLP can do it, so that doesn't necessarily have to be the case. But like I did 2 weeks ago where the kiddo's been trialing at ABA because the family doesn't currently have an SLP on their team. And so they wanted a device. And so their service coordinator got them hooked up with me at our clinic. And so we went through and are doing the evaluation process to hopefully get him a designated device. But again, initiating trials, like Emily said, we're not going to just kind of blindly say, oh yeah, AAC is going to be great for this kid and they're going to start communicating. Let's get them a device. We do want to get some data behind it and kind of see how they're responding, what program they're responding better to, and then go from there if you're looking at that high tech evaluation. The other thing is, just teaming with your DT. So again, for me, I've had families where maybe they've been introducing some picture exchange at home, and I want to know that because maybe in our speech sessions, that hasn't really been the case as much just yet, but now they're trying to do some visuals for snack time and they're really food motivated. And okay, well, I don't have that opportunity in speech, but I can definitely do that with some of my play activities. So, always teaming with your vendors to let us know like what's going on, because with different routines and in different environments, there could be things that you all are trying that we're not, and vice versa, that we want to know, because consistency is going to be key for helping them learn and understand how to utilize whatever communication system we're trying to teach them in those environments. Trials, again, low, mid, high tech, especially if we're thinking high tech, those trials, like I said, to kind of gather that data and know which company we might be requesting insurance provide us and a device for. But also, again, just knowing what you guys are trying out in regards to any kind of picture exchange or core boards or anything else that's going on. And I might be trying a combination. Again, I've had kids where they were very like song or food motivated. So we maybe started with some picture exchange for just those activities and routines and speech. And I didn't do them across the entire session. And once they kind of learned and gathered that ability in those situations, then maybe we expanded it. Or then that's maybe when we are like, okay, they've got this foundation, like Emily said, they have this communicative intent. Maybe I'm going to try some high tech with those songs and see how they do. I have a kiddo right now who's actually has done that. She loves to sing different songs. So we had representations of all of her favorite songs. She slowly figured out that whole requesting because she didn't really get a consistent way to request at that point. Then she got that, and then we kind of transferred it over to high tech, and now she's using a high tech app on my iPad and kind of trialing it throughout her session, and also has now picked up verbalization. So there's also times where maybe you're trialing in a session and it may not feel like the route to go just yet. So that's fine. Like keep doing it, keep trialing, as long as you're opening up a means of communication for that child. It can just be maybe a support and a tool, and you don't feel the need to go for a full evaluation, or you want to wait, something like that. When you're trialing, so when you're doing your evaluation, and so when you go in and you're doing your evaluation in order to get a family a device, right? So I'll pull in a couple different things for that. So insurance wants to see that you've kind of ruled out other devices, and that's why you're recommending this specific one. Something I learned when I started doing these AAC evaluations, and in my head, I always thought, oh, well, I have to trial, Tobii Dynavox, and I also need to trial Proliquo to Go, and then TouchChat, and it always has to be something different. And I learned from our Tobii representative that they really just want you to rule out anything that's slightly different. So there might be a time where I have a Tobii Dynavox device that has TD Snap on it, which is one of their softwares, and then on another one I have Motor Plan, and so that's different. So although it's still Tobii Dynavox, there's something different about it. Or maybe I have TD Snap and I have one that's on the Navio, but then I have one that's on the I-110. So even though it's the same program, the device is different. And so I learned that. So that took me a minute to figure out myself, but it can just be something that's different. And so I've done an evaluation where I've had a kiddo who's been trialing TD Snap with me in therapy. And so we just pulled a couple different devices with the same software to see which one's most compatible with the family's life, which one's more durable, which one's the right weight, which one's the right size, all of that kind of thing that matters, obviously, for being the best fit for designated for that child specifically. And then when you've done your trials and kind of finding that success, what does your kiddo gravitate towards? This doesn't mean that they have to come in the evaluation and be like, I want cookies, I want snack. Like that's not what insurance is saying you have to do. But you want to say, like, what did they attend to when you were modeling? What did they take a glance at? What did they tap and bang on? Any ways that they're interacting with it that you like can show has some potential for them to learn from and be taught how to use. Just like Emily said, this is still a teaching component. They're not just going to pick it up and be like, I'm a communicator now. But there's going to be those signs that you can kind of tell, like, oh yeah, that grid size really worked for them. They were able to isolate and try some buttons, or they tried to like swipe and go through and look at the different pages. And I tell my families when they're going through and just tapping on it, like we're encouraging that just like we would encourage a small toddler to babble, right? So if a toddler babbles at you and they're like bloody blue blue, and you're like, oh yeah, blue I see it, I'm going to do the exact same thing when they touch that device and they say pineapple, orange, apple. I'm like, oh yeah, I love pineapples too. I'm going to use it as a conversation tool. So that's the big thing too, is really praising the small things that they do with the device and knowing that you can teach and build on all of those small interactions they might have with it. And also how comfortable the parent is. That's really important too, because some of the programs and systems might be more iOS based. Some of them might be Windows based. And if you have a family who's like, I can't do Apple updates, I don't know what you're talking about, they don't need to have an iOS based system, because that caregiver is the programmer at home, and they are the person who's going to be helping them sync all the vocabulary sets and all of that. And so you want to make sure that your caregiver, especially in the EI population, is going to be comfortable with a device. I have families who come in and they'll say, oh, well, I heard LAMP is the best thing for autism. And I'm like, okay, great. Like, that's wonderful. Let's look at LAMP. They take one look at it and they're like, oh, heck no, I can't. That hurts my head. And I'm like, well, if you're not feeling confident in interacting with it and playing around with it yourself, then I don't feel great about sending you guys home with this to try to teach and work on it with your kiddo at home. So helping coach and helping caregivers understand how they can be a part of that team too, and how their opinion matters. It's going to be that kid's voice, but they are such a huge part of being that communication partner for them. So that really matters too in your evaluation.
We do have another
yeah.
question. And we've gotten some really good comments that I'll report out that aren't questions. So at the end, I'll cover those. But a question that we do have is, can you describe adaptations for placing the device for children that have low mobility? And someone came into the chat after that and said that TD's site has great info on the various modifications available specific to the child's need, including mobility, low vision, etc. But someone was asking about children that have low mobility.
Yeah, absolutely. So like Emily said, there's a lot of different switch options. If you're, in a clinic that's pretty well stocked, you might have some of those things to trial. I honestly, most of my kids, because I primarily work with the autistic population, the mobility doesn't always um, come as part of the difficulty. I do have coworkers who have some kiddos like that. We have a great relationship with our Toby rep. So sometimes we'll ask her like, hey, we have a kiddo who's non-ambulatory. Could we have some things to trial? Your representatives for all the different companies are always very receptive to usually bringing in things and letting you kind of trial that. So that's a great teaming situation to talk with your SLP about for sure, to reach out. I know, for instance, one of my coworkers has a little girl, non-ambulatory. She started by activating with her feet. So they realized that was the most intentional movement she had. And so they presented the device down. I think she's positioned in a wheelchair or however it was, so she could visually still see it. A lot of the programs will have like a high contrast setting, so you can change that for visual needs if needed. I'm trying to think. We talked about the eye gaze, of course. Also, when you're requesting, like once you've kind of gone through and maybe talked with your representative and kind of trialed some of the different adaptations, when you're requesting a designated device, there's also the ability to add on features that's going to be needed. So things like a wheelchair mount or a table mount, a key guard. So for some of your kiddos who may not isolate very well, you can get a key guard to where the buttons that would be one continuous touch screen are now kind of broken up. So that will help them to make sure that they are getting just to the button that they want to get to. So a lot of those can be added on features that would be a part of the package of what you're requesting insurance to purchase. So that way the kid is set up and, to be able to communicate and utilize whatever adaptations they might need. Is there anything else that I'm missing with that?
I was thinking the candy corn switch. So there are some switches that might be considered like a mid-grade switch where I don't actually have to touch it, but I can move my hand past it and it's a sensor in that regard. And I would just say if you're a vendor or if you're in communication with an SLP vendor, encourage them to reach out to their representatives of these various companies. In most cases, the representatives from the company are SLPs, or maybe they're occupational therapists with a lot of communication knowledge, but they have knowledge of how to access these different methods. And so just saying, hey, can you come and show me some of the things that you have available? I'm treating a child who has this, and this need. Because they want to get involved. A lot of times those reps are like, I love what I do, but also I miss the children. So they're usually very happy to come and play with you.
Yeah. And even an SLP who knows a ton about AAC, there's so much out there that I have still no idea about. So I know I can reach out to my reps and say exactly what Emily said, like, I need your expertise. Because that's all they do day in and day out is know their company's products and what they can do for our populations. So yeah, great questions.
One more. That was great information. Thank you so much. Someone said, and you may be getting here, but they said, how do you recommend a family starting to familiarize use of a device at home? What would those beginning steps be?
Yeah, that's great. Well, I think you can really, lean into your FGRBI practice when it comes to AAC. It falls in line with that. It's very overwhelming to say, okay, keep this tablet with your 3-year-old all day long. Good luck. That's a lot, So I'd help them really kind of isolate, okay, what do you feel like is a time where they're very attentive and it's easy to engage with them? They're seated and they're in a high chair and it's snack time. Great. Let's do that time. These things are wipeable. They're waterproof. It's okay. So just thinking through a routine that's going to be helpful for you to just start modeling. And just like verbal communication, it's present words, present vocabulary all day long or throughout the routine as much as possible. So you're being the communication partner and you're really taking the lead in that. So helping the caregiver kind of take over and recognize like, okay, we're having snack and I'm going to talk about carrots and I'm going to say crunch, crunch, crunch. And I'm going to talk about how they're orange. And I'm going to just talk to my kiddo using this device just like I would or I am doing verbally. I think that's one of the best things to do is just to kind of reduce down the expectation, because it's just a lot to start figuring out the device and where things are. And being able to, just navigate that interaction. And it doesn't feel naturalistic at first. It feels natural just to talk, right? But we're having to kind of program ourselves too as the peer model or the communication partner. And so I think to just reduce down the expectation of it's going to take a while for this to become more of the norm in the house. So that's definitely where I would start. And then, of course, at speech, kind of keep collaborating with your speech therapist and or your developmental therapist on how to keep building on that or troubleshoot what's not working with introducing it at home.
And if families are overwhelmed, encouraging them to choose one word. What is one word that you will consistently model every day this week? Just pick one, because some modeling is better than no modeling.
Mm-hmm. And I wish I had the data, but there was a study, and it was comparing the amount of words modeled to an AAC user versus a verbal child, and the number was just astronomically different. And so that's the biggest thing is like if you can just model language like you were talking and as if you're talking to your kiddo and pairing that with the device, like that's already a huge step in the right direction. Because just inherently for I guess reasons of it just being different, we don't model as much on the device as we do if we were verbally interacting with our kiddo. So just thinking of that.
One more question. If you guys
Sure.
want, I'll let you keep going and I can report it out at the
No.
end. What would you prefer?
No, I'm
Okay.
good. Yeah, it's great.
Awesome.
I love it.
So the next question is, some families report hearing that their child will have to use one specific platform or device when they move to the LEA. How true is this, and how much do we need to consider it in the early stages of AAC?
Well, I mean, I would hope and think if the child has a designated device that's able to travel with them, then that school, and you can have it written in the IEP, that needs to be modeled on and utilized throughout the day. I do think the trickier part, which both of us actually worked in Knox County schools here as well, so we have that perspective from AAC. I do think maybe the accessibility of what's in your school system and that you're able to pull from assistive technology to start introducing and modeling on, that might be more reduced because school systems maybe only have, one certain program downloaded and on their iPads or devices available. So that might be true, but from my experience, I haven't had a family leave with a device and say, well, the school says I won't use her Tobii Dynavox, I have to use her Proloquo. It's more the introduction of it, and them maybe being a little bit more isolated because that's just what's available in that school, is my experience.
Awesome. Perfect. One more, and you just let me know if you want to wait till the end, but I'll go ahead and do this one. Where can I go to get information to give my families on how they can go about getting an AAC device? I may have some families that may feel their child would benefit from a device, but afraid to request the device due to their low income.
I mean, I would talk to their SLP because it really is going to come back to their speech therapist. If they're not in speech therapy, I definitely would get them in speech therapy. But that's kind of the next point is an evaluation for a designated device has to be done by an SLP. So what we run into a lot is, families have maybe increased to 40 hours of ABA. And so they no longer are seeing an SLP, but now this ABA therapist is introducing a device, which, communication is communication, but we kind of have to keep, our communication experts, the SLP, right? Like it's still going to come back to that SLP, no matter the income, the device you're requesting, any of that, it's going to have to be done by an SLP. So that conversation needs to happen with them. That also is a great point for the next point, which is any SLP can do an AAC evaluation. So often we are hearing like, well, send them to UT. UT does that. UT will do that. Absolutely, I will do that. However, any SLP is able to. If it's out of their comfort zone and they're not sure, that's a different conversation. That's a time that they can, maybe some teaming and helping as the DT to say, hey, well, I learned that, you can have a representative come and help you with the eval. I mean, even having done them, I've had a tricky case or two where I've asked our rep to come and do an eval with me because I was like, I'm just not sure how this one's going to go. And I kind of feel like I could use your backup. And she's been happy to do that, right? Again, like Emily said, they love talking about their devices. They love interacting with families because they don't always get to do that. So, hopefully we want to empower more SLPs to go and do the device evals because it can't just keep coming back to a provider or two in the area. Because like I said, we're running into the situation where a family has to have, a trial period. And if I'm only getting them for an evaluation and they're not actually with me for therapy and have a different SLP for therapy, well, then that's kind of just causing some difficulty with insurance and back and forth because they're wanting it to be trialed with an SLP before it'll get funded. So kind of keeping that to be all the same person. And I know on my end, I involve my graduate students in it because I want them to leave our program feeling more confident and comfortable in doing these AAC evaluations, because if they get to practice with me, they have me to lean into, and then they also have gone through it and it can get quicker and faster, and they feel more confident going and able to do these on their own. And so we're also trying our best to educate our students to go out, and so we have more SLPs in the world or area who are doing the AAC evals. So we did a little pro-con list to kind of help you all, with when is a designated device a great option and when is it maybe not necessary yet, or we don't need to go through the funding eval process. So some pros for your designated device is durability, hands down. I had a kiddo who I don't even know how, but had a designated device that he bit through and it shattered the screen. And mom and I could never figure it out. But you know what? It was replaced. It still turned on even after all of that. I mean, it looked horrible and that thing still turned on. I don't even know how. So it was not functional, but it still worked to a degree. But the durability is great when you get those designated devices. Tech support, SLP support. So with these companies, you have, a direct tech line. You have situations like if it is broken and it's within that window of warranty, it's going to get replaced. So the tech support is amazing that you can get when you have that designated device. The feature matching is great to be able to have those icons and everything, working really well for that child. The cost, having it, obviously reduced drastically because insurance is either going to cover all of it or a large portion of it. That's really great, obviously, to help out our families. It's individualized. So I'm trialing, my iPad app that I can with a whole bunch of different families here, but I can't personalize it to that individual kiddo because it's going across session to session. So as much as I'd love to take a picture of mom, who's the communication partner in my session, and put it on there, with HIPAA, I can't have a bunch of parent pictures and child pictures floating around on my generally used iPad. But once I have a kid who gets a designated device, we are personalizing that iPad. And I'm helping families, take a picture of the family dog and of his bedroom and, of the grandparents and all of that. So you can really personalize it to that child's needs, which is amazing. And then, of course, the equipment pieces like we talked about, and being able to request those along with that designated device. Some cons. So timeline, again, if you're, waiting for speech, or if you're, requesting it and you're having to go through the insurance or go through the appeal or go through the trials, all of that can take a while. And so some, again, it's all so individualized. Some insurances will turn it around very quick. Some, you're getting a couple months wait when, we don't want communication to wait. We want this kid to have access now. So that is kind of a downfall of waiting for that insurance process. again, the cost, if it's not fully covered, I'm not always on that side of things. I don't often talk to my families 100% about, what they paid or didn't pay for a device. But it's an expensive device. And so, if it's not 100% covered, then that can definitely be a burden on some families. Absolutely. Or all families. You don't have that feature matching component, and the lack of tech support and being able to get that, you know, uh, going when something's going wrong, or kind of just figuring it out. And internet is great, but also just having a direct line to call and say, hey, this isn't working. I mean, I even had a kiddo where theirs just stopped charging all of a sudden, and it was almost brand new to them. And again, the company just replaced it. And we're like, well, that must have been a malfunction. Here you go. I don't think Apple's going to just do that and just replace iPads left and right. So there's definitely some pros and cons to that designated device.
And that's a good plug for if you have a designated device, you absolutely 100% need a paper-based printed version as a backup because technology fails sometimes.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. So just some extra info for the IFSP team, for our service coordinators and everything on here. Just making sure that teaming obviously is still happening here. There's definitely been times where not just TEIS, but from a doctor, I'm getting a referral in and they want an AAC device, and it's getting marked off as like a language evaluation. And so as the vendor, I'm prepping, getting ready for a language eval, and the family walks in and they're like, yeah, we just really want that AAC device. And I'm like, the what? Huh? And I literally 2 weeks ago, I did an AAC eval on the fly because I thought it was a language eval, but it wasn't communicated to me. And there's a difference, right? Going through this funding eval process versus I'm, looking at a language delay and recommending therapy or not. So just making sure that is as clear as possible with your team going in. And then if it needs to be added to the IFSP or not, making sure that all that's just lined up and as communicated as well as possible to your vendor, so we know what to prep. Thankfully, I'm in a situation where we're kind of well stocked, and I was able to grab a coworker's device and I pulled trials together. But not every SLP is going to be in that situation. They might need to reach out to their representative and get them to bring devices into their clinic, and all of that can be, a couple days, a week heads up, that kind of thing. So we don't want to waste anyone's time or bill for the wrong thing or any of that. So just making sure that that's communicated, because it is very different from the SLP to prep an AAC eval versus your typical speech and language eval. And then just insurance specific requirements, like I've talked about a little bit, knowing that there might be a trial period after the funding evaluation. Sometimes they're going to really recommend ongoing treatment plan for speech. So again, in the situation of someone else has initiated some trials and they just want this referral for this eval, and I need to advocate and say, well, is there going to be a speech therapist working with this kid after? Are you wanting to do speech therapy with me? Because most insurances are going to want to know that this device is getting to this kid, and they have that professional on their team to kind of guide the process from there. So kind of thinking ahead. I know wait lists are insane, and that is just such an awful situation to be in. I hate it as the SLP as well, but that's just kind of the fact that of the matter that we're in is that person's really going to have to be part of that team. We're going to need to get that kid into speech somewhere. And maybe they're going to the schools, and I can also advocate for that too and say, yeah, well, I'm doing the device request, but the school SLP is going to take over the trials, and I can advocate for what that treatment plan is going to look like too. And just remembering that there could be an initial denial. We never panic. I always, at first I always thought like, oh no, I'm denied. I've messed it all up. No, like there's an appeal process for a reason. There's trials for a reason. Sometimes that adds to the timeline, unfortunately, but that's just the insurance world that we're living in. And so that's just helpful to prep families for, and to help them understand the process as much as possible going into it, and knowing it's not going to ship to their house the next week.
Okay, so this last little section here we'll go through briefly is related to the survey results. And so this survey, we accessed some pediatric language clinic families because I wrote the survey and that's why I had access to it. So we had 17 families in total respond, and about 75% of those families, autism was the main diagnosis, although there were others. So essentially the survey had some statements such as this, and then parents were to say like, I strongly agree, I strongly disagree, and all those Likert scale items in the middle here. So you can see through this one, the statement was, I consider my child to be nonverbal or pre-verbal. And most families strongly agreed that that was the case, and that was sort of why they were pursuing this AAC device for their child. The next one here was that their child already uses some form of AAC at home or in therapy. And kind of interesting, this was the reverse. So a lot of families here, you can see 5 of them actually strongly disagreed that the child was not using AAC at home or at therapy. And then following up with some of these families, I think this came from they're using it at therapy, but we don't have a designated device yet for home. So I feel confident in my knowledge of how to model and use my child's communication device. We're kind of in the middle on this one. Most families said, I feel okay with it, but I don't feel confident quite yet. So some future areas for us to help address. And then this was like, what sort of communication device is your child using? This was a check all that apply. Some kiddos are using visuals in certain areas, but they're trialing a high-tech device, or I have visuals that I use at grandma's house, and then my device, maybe stays at my house, that sort of thing. So most families were using some sort of visual, several families using either a Tobii Dynavox device, which would be a dedicated device, or an iPad with a dedicated app. My child's communication device was funded by insurance. You can see some families weren't sure. It's just like, I know we're working on it, but I don't know quite where we are yet. So maybe some education related to, hey, this is what the process looks like. This is why we're doing it. But 3 of our families in this situation said, yes, my child's communication device was funded by insurance. I feel I've been provided appropriate education related to my child's device. For some reason, this didn't copy well. So 1 was strongly disagree, 5 at the bottom was strongly agree. So most families really agreed that they had been provided appropriate education, which is great. Yay us. And this was just some qualitative information and feedback that we had received from families. So a frustration was that we don't know how to use it. And so it frustrates both me and my child. I need help on how to use it and how to customize it to meet my individual needs. Another family said that they needed information on how to back up what I've programmed. I've had to restart twice now, which can be devastating. Maggie talked a lot about how to individualize a device. And so once you've done that and done the work, it can be really frustrating if you have to start from scratch again, which is why we have the cloud as an option. And so helping families learn how to back up there. Another family said that they need help getting age-appropriate content on the device. So, because it is a robust device, it's meant to follow children throughout their lifespan. And so some topics may be appropriate when you're 19, but they're not appropriate when you're 4, right? I would like to, I want to know what she's hurting so that I can help meet her needs. She uses one at speech therapy. So maybe this family needs some more information about, hey, maybe it's time to pursue an evaluation to get a dedicated device that can go between home and therapy. And then this last comment here, we don't have a designated device, so he's able to access the streaming apps that we have that I use to keep him distracted in the car. This might be a plug for guided access. So if you're using an iPad, there's a feature called guided access where you can lock the screen in the communication app. That way you can't get to the streaming apps. But that could be a situation where your voice should go with you all the time. And so if you're watching your favorite show, ideally you'd like to be able to have your device and not have to toggle between screens so that you can say something like, oh, that was really silly. Mom, did you see what happened with Bluey that time? Or something along those lines. Okay, so to wrap it up, a prereq skill for AAC, breathing, that's it. We should presume confidence in all of our children, all of our AAC device users. And then our friend, hey girl, I like how you're modeling communication by using the student's device, right? So modeling using both your verbal language and the communication device of the child in all situations. I think the others, yeah. So this is just our contact information if there are any questions that we don't have time for. Emily, were there a few that we saved for the end?
There are, we have about 2 minutes left, so I'll just go ahead and read off what we have in here. One question was, a lot of our families are waiting a very long time for speech therapy. What is the best way for a developmental therapist to support a family that we suspect could benefit from some type of AAC when the family does not yet have an SLP on their team?
That's tricky.
That's great.
Yeah.
I know. It's so awful. I mean, there's a lot of really great programs out there. I don't know how much you can advocate for having some availability and like building your own kind of picture, library with your DT group. And, like we said, just start modeling, starting to look for, communication wise, where is that child most motivated? What are they most likely to want to request or label or talk about? And really, you're just starting to pair that verbal communication along with a visual support. So whether if that's a picture and you love Bluey, great, let's watch Bluey, I love Bluey. You're just helping to build that object or picture association to that verbalization. So anybody can be doing that. What you have access to, whether that's high tech or pictures. We use a program called Lesson Picks, which I've even purchased on my own at a time or two. It's like a $35 per year subscription, and it has a huge repertoire of clip art and easy schedule builders and first then board builders and all that kind of stuff. It's just so easy to make things on. So if you're able to have something like that as the DT, or like I said, to have an account as a group that you all could all share from, that makes it easy, at least on your part, for planning and printing and having that available. I also say, we all have, high tech phones, right, in our pockets. And so you're in the house and you're like, oh, I really want to use a picture. Take a picture of something. Just take a picture, have a photo library, make a folder and say, this is Rory's folder. And so in Rory's folder, when I go to her house, we have goldfish and we have bubbles and we have toys, that she enjoys or whatever. And I can just pull that out and maybe we use a picture album. It doesn't have to be some fancy made for AAC situation. It's just a visual support. And so that can hopefully be a quick thing you could do in your session if needed.
Awesome. We have one more question for anybody that wants to hang with us just a second longer. I wanted to do a quick wrap up. Just wanted to let everyone know that our next Lunch and Learn will be March 26th from 11:30 a.m. to 12:30 p.m. Central Time. We're going to have Jessica Beaver with the Therapy and Learning Center, and she's going to give us an introduction to conscious discipline. So I think that's going to be a really great Lunch and Learn. Thank you all for your amazing engagement today. I love when people are asking questions because a lot of times, if you have that question, somebody else probably has that question. So thank you all for your engagement. Are you guys good to do another question or two? Anybody that needs to exit out,
Sure.
feel free to exit out. I think our last question I see here is, if an SLP provides services via telehealth, can they still do an AAC eval or recommendation?
That's tricky. Gosh, telehealth is hard. I think it's really going to be kid dependent. I'm trying to think of the AAC evals I've done. I don't necessarily have anywhere where I have to designate that it was telehealth or not. It's just going to be hard to kind of see some of those nuance, things about glances to a device, I really need them to physically interact with it. I don't know how you would get the device in the home. So that could be a situation. Maybe you have the representative from the company, because again, they've gone, to homes, to clinics, to schools. I don't know if you maybe team somehow with them to see if they can physically be present with the family, since they have reps in certain, like for instance, Toby Donavox has a West rep, a Middle Tennessee, and an East Tennessee rep. So if I'm here in Knoxville, but my patient's in the Murfreesboro area, maybe that Middle Tennessee person goes there, and then I help on my end with the data collection. So That's a great question. I've not had that situation happen, but I don't want to say it's not possible. It would be tricky. And that definitely, I think, would involve probably reaching out to a rep who could get there in person to have that child really lay hands on it, because you definitely don't want to go through the process and request the wrong thing that they're not really interacting with very well.
I would
Awesome.
think also that insurance may have something to say about that, that a
Yeah.
specific insurance company may be okay with that while others might not be. So the company rep should have some knowledge of that also.
Awesome. We have a comment here that says, it's from Megan Cow, and I apologize if I am not pronouncing your last name correctly. She says she's with PLC. She asked if she could pick your brain, Maggie and Emily, after this. She said it could be in another Zoom. She said she texted Emily. So just throwing that out there, you may
Yeah.
have a text message to check. Everything else is very complimentary. Thank you so much. Very, very helpful information. Someone said, "Thank you. This was awesome sauce. I wish you guys can come to the Memphis Delta POE to do a presentation for us regarding devices." Just a lot of really, really positive feedback on the information that you all have provided. So thank you so much for participating and giving us this great information today. Everybody that's still out there listening, keep in mind this will be posted on the TEIS Community Resource website within a couple of days. Please pass this on to families on your caseload that you think could benefit from this information. I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording. We're a couple of minutes after they've shared their contact information here, so please feel free to reach out to them. If any other questions come through the chat and you guys are gone, I will pass those on to you to make sure that you get those questions.
That's great. Thanks.
Sounds good.
All right. Thank you guys so much. I hope
Thanks,
everyone.
Emily.
Yeah, thank you all. And everyone have a great rest of the day. And we hope to see you in our March Lunch and Learn.